The advertisement in the Boston Herald had promised respectable employment keeping house for a widowed rancher in Owyhee, Nevada. But as the stagecoach rattled through increasingly barren landscape in late May of 1882, Rebecca Grace wondered if she had made the gravest mistake of her 22 years. The other passengers had disembarked at previous stops, leaving her alone with her trunk, her doubts, and the pervasive dust that seemed to penetrate every fold of her charcoal traveling dress. Through the window, she watched scrub, brush, and rocky outcroppings replace the last vestiges of civilization, and her gloved hands twisted together in her lap with such force that her knuckles ached. She had left Boston 3 weeks ago with nothing but a letter of employment from a Mr. Preston Parker, a man who required someone to manage his household after his wife's passing the previous winter. The position offered room, board, and $30 monthly, which was more than Rebecca could have hoped to earn in the textile mills, where most women of her reduced circumstances found themselves. Her father's debts had consumed everything when he died, and her mother's subsequent illness had taken what little remained, including eventually her mother herself. Rebecca had no siblings, no prospects, and no options beyond accepting charity from distant relatives who made their reluctance abundantly clear, or taking her chances in the Wild West. The stagecoach lurched over a particularly vicious rut, and Rebecca's head knocked against the wooden frame despite her attempt to brace herself. She could hear the driver shouting to the horses, urging them onward as the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly. Nevada in late spring was already brutally hot, and she felt perspiration gathering beneath her collar and along her spine. Her corset seemed to constrict with each breath, and she longed to loosen it, but propriety forbade such behavior even in solitude. Owyhee. The driver called out, and Rebecca leaned toward the window eagerly, desperate for her first glimpse of what would be her new home. What she saw made her heart sink toward her practical leather boots. The town consisted of perhaps 24 buildings scattered along a single dirt road that could hardly be called a street. A general store, a saloon, what appeared to be a livery stable, and a handful of other structures she could not immediately identify comprised the entire settlement. Beyond the town, the landscape stretched endlessly in all directions, brown and inhospitable under the relentless sun. The stagecoach shuddered to a halt before the general store, and the driver climbed down to open her door. He was a weathered man of perhaps 50, with skin like tanned leather and eyes that squinted perpetually against the glare. "This is it, miss," he announced, offering his hand to help her descend. "Not much to look at, but folks here are decent enough if you mind your business." Rebecca accepted his assistance, stepping down onto the hard-packed earth with legs that trembled from the long journey. "Thank you. I am looking for Mr. Preston Parker's ranch. He was supposed to meet me here." The driver retrieved her trunk from the boot of the coach and set it down with a heavy thud. "Parker Ranch is about 5 miles west of town. Someone will be along directly, I reckon. You can wait inside where it is cooler." Before Rebecca could respond, the driver had climbed back onto his seat and snapped the reins. The stagecoach rolled away in a cloud of dust, leaving her standing alone on the street with her trunk and her increasingly frantic thoughts. She glanced around, noting several curious faces peering at her from windows and doorways. A woman in a faded calico dress stood on the porch of what might have been a boarding house, arms crossed over her chest, expression inscrutable. The general store's door stood open, and Rebecca could see barrels and shelves inside, dimly lit by the light filtering through grimy windows. She was gathering her courage to enter when she heard the sound of approaching hoofbeats. A man rode into view on a large bay horse, sitting his saddle with the easy grace of someone born to it. He wore dusty work clothes, a wide-brimmed hat pulled low against the sun, and a red bandana around his throat. As he drew closer, Rebecca could see he was young, perhaps no more than 28 or 30, with strong features bronzed by outdoor work. He reined in his horse and touched the brim of his hat, his eyes assessing her with frank curiosity. "Miss Grace." "Yes," Rebecca replied, clasping her hands together to stop their trembling. "Are you Mr. Parker?" "Preston Parker," he confirmed, swinging down from the saddle with fluid motion. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and lean hips. His hands, she noticed, were work-roughened and capable. "You made good time. The telegram said you would arrive this week, but I was not certain which day." "The journey was faster than anticipated," Rebecca said, her Boston accent sounding foreign and affected in this harsh landscape. "I hope my early arrival does not inconvenience you." Something flickered in Preston's blue eyes, but his expression remained neutral. "No inconvenience. I will load your trunk onto the wagon. I have it waiting at the livery." He lifted her heavy trunk as though it weighed nothing and started down the street. Rebecca hurried to keep pace with his long strides, her skirts stirring up small clouds of dust with each step. She noticed people watching them, conversations pausing as they passed. A man emerged from the saloon, leaning against the doorframe with interest, but Preston paid him no attention. The livery stable was marginally cooler inside, smelling of hay and horses and leather. A wagon stood ready, hitched to a team of sturdy horses. Preston secured her trunk in the back with practiced efficiency, then turned to help her onto the seat. His hands on her waist were impersonal but firm, lifting her easily. The brief contact made Rebecca acutely aware that she was about to ride into the wilderness with a man who was essentially a stranger. Preston climbed up beside her and took the reins. "It is about an hour to the ranch. The road is rough in places." "I understand," Rebecca said, though in truth she understood very little about what lay ahead. "Your letter mentioned you have a ranch. What do you raise?" "Cattle mostly. Some horses." Preston guided the team out of the livery and turned them west away from town. "The ranch has been in my family since before the war. My father started it, and I took over when he passed 8 years ago." "I am sorry for your loss," Rebecca said automatically, then added more quietly, "and for the recent loss of your wife. That must have been very difficult." Preston's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Catherine died in February. Pneumonia. It came on sudden and took her quick." The pain in his voice was fresh enough that Rebecca knew better than to press further. Instead, she asked, "How large is your household?" "Just me now," Preston replied, his attention apparently focused on the horses. "I have 4 ranch hands who bunk in the bunkhouse. They take their meals in the main house, which is where you come in. Catherine managed all of that, the cooking and cleaning and such. Since she passed, we have been making do, but it is not sustainable. The men need proper meals and the house needs tending." Rebecca absorbed this information, understanding her role more clearly now. "How many will I be cooking for?" 6, counting me and you. "Sometimes more if we have extra hands during roundup or branding, but that is not until fall." "I can manage that," Rebecca said with more confidence than she felt. She had learned to cook out of necessity after her mother became ill, but never for so many at once. "What time do the men expect their meals?" "Breakfast at dawn, dinner at noon, supper after the work is done. Usually around 7 or 8 in the evening." Preston glanced at her, and for the first time she saw something like concern in his expression. "It is a lot of work. I will not pretend otherwise. But you will have Sundays mostly to yourself, except for putting out a cold meal." "That seems fair," Rebecca replied, though her mind was already racing through calculations of what needed to be done. 6 people, 3 meals a day, plus cleaning and laundry and all the other household tasks. She would be working from before sunrise until well after dark. But it was honest work, and she would have a roof over her head and food in her belly, which was more than she had been guaranteed in Boston. They rode in silence for a while, the wagon creaking over the uneven ground. The landscape was unlike anything Rebecca had ever seen, vast and open and almost frightening in its emptiness. Sagebrush dotted the rocky soil, and distant mountains shimmered in the heat. The sky overhead was a blue so intense it hurt to look at directly. "It must be quite a change from Boston," Preston said eventually, and Rebecca detected no mockery in his tone, only observation. "Yes," she admitted. "Very different indeed, but I am adaptable. I will learn." "The isolation is hardest for most people," Preston continued. "Owyhee is small, but it is the only town for 20 miles in any direction. The ranch is 5 miles from there, which means you will be quite removed from society." "I did not have much society in Boston," Rebecca said quietly. "After my mother passed, I found that acquaintances can be remarkably scarce when one's fortunes decline." Preston nodded as though he understood perfectly. "People are different out here. Less concerned with where you came from, more interested in what you can do and whether you keep your word." "Then I should fit in well enough," Rebecca replied. "I may not know much about ranch life, but I am a hard worker and I honor my commitments." "That is all anyone can ask," Preston said, and Rebecca thought she detected approval in his voice. As they crested a low rise, Preston pointed ahead. "There. That is the ranch." Rebecca looked where he indicated and saw a cluster of buildings nestled in a shallow valley, where a creek provided a thin green line of vegetation. The main house was larger than she had expected, a 2-story structure built of wood and stone with a covered porch wrapping around 2 sides. Several outbuildings surrounded it, including a large barn, a bunkhouse, corrals, and various sheds. Cattle grazed in the distance, dark shapes against the brown earth. "It is quite substantial," Rebecca said, genuinely impressed despite her nervousness. "My father built well," Preston replied, and she heard pride in his voice. "The house has 4 bedrooms, a parlor, a kitchen, and a dining room. You will have your own room upstairs. It is modest but private." As they drew closer, Rebecca could see the ranch more clearly. The buildings were well maintained, and the whole operation spoke of prosperity and careful management. 4 men emerged from the barn as the wagon approached, clearly curious about the new arrival. They were all young, ranging from perhaps 20 to 35, dressed in work clothes and wearing expressions of frank interest. Preston pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house and set the brake. "Miss Grace, these are my hands. That is Jack Murphy, Daniel Cross, Thomas White, and Samuel Hill." Rebecca nodded to each man in turn, trying to commit their names and faces to memory. Jack was the oldest, with a graying beard and kind eyes. Daniel was the youngest, barely out of boyhood, with sandy hair and freckles. Thomas was dark-haired and serious-looking, while Samuel had a friendly smile. "Pleased to meet you, miss," Jack said, speaking for the group. "We are looking forward to some decent cooking again. No offense to Preston, but the man cannot boil water without burning it." The other men laughed, and even Preston's mouth quirked in what might have been amusement. Rebecca felt some of her tension ease. "I will do my best to meet your expectations, gentlemen." Preston climbed down and came around to help her from the wagon. Again, his hands on her waist were firm and impersonal, though Rebecca could not help but notice the strength in them. He gestured toward the house. "Let me show you around before supper. The men can bring your trunk up to your room." The porch steps were solid under Rebecca's feet as she climbed them, and the front door opened easily at Preston's touch. Inside, the house was dim and blessedly cool after the heat outside. Preston led her through a small entryway into a parlor furnished with sturdy furniture that had clearly been chosen for comfort rather than fashion. A fireplace dominated one wall, and windows looked out over the porch toward the mountains. "The dining room is through here," Preston said, leading her through a doorway into a room with a long table that could easily seat 10. Rebecca noticed immediately that the table was set for 6, but something about the arrangement caught her attention. The place at the head of the table, which should have been Preston's seat as master of the house, had a different setting from the others. The plate was finer china, the silverware more delicate, clearly meant for a woman. Preston saw her looking and cleared his throat. That was Catherine's place. "I have not, that is, I thought you should sit there. You will be running the household now, so it seems fitting." Rebecca stared at him, shocked by the gesture. In any proper household, the housekeeper would eat in the kitchen or perhaps at the foot of the table if she ate with the family at all. To be given the mistress's seat was unprecedented, almost scandalous. "Mr. Parker, I cannot possibly," she began, but he cut her off with a sharp gesture. "It is just Preston. We do not stand on formality here." His blue eyes met hers directly. "And you can sit there. You will be working harder than anyone else on this ranch except perhaps me. You deserve a place of respect at this table." Rebecca felt her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. "That is very generous, but people will talk. It is not proper for a housekeeper to sit at the head of the table." "Let them talk," Preston said flatly. "Anyone who works on my ranch earns my respect, and I show it as I see fit. If you are uncomfortable, you do not have to sit there, but the seat is yours if you want it." Rebecca looked at the carefully set place again, at the delicate china that had belonged to Preston's late wife. The gesture spoke of something deeper than mere practicality. It spoke of a man who valued people for their contributions, who did not rigidly adhere to social conventions that made little sense in this wild place. It also spoke of a man still grieving, trying to find a way to honor his wife's memory while moving forward. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I am honored." Preston nodded, looking relieved that she had not argued further. "The kitchen is back here." The kitchen was large and well equipped, with a massive iron stove, multiple work surfaces, and shelves lined with dishes and cooking implements. A pump at the sink provided water from the well, and windows let in good light. Rebecca could see that it had been neglected recently, with dust accumulating on surfaces and a general air of disuse, but the bones were excellent. "Catherine kept things organized in her own way," Preston said, sounding apologetic. "I have tried to maintain it, but I am afraid I have fallen short." "It is a good kitchen," Rebecca assured him. "I can work with this. Do you have a smokehouse, a root cellar?" "Both." "I will show you tomorrow in daylight. There is salt pork, some smoked beef, potatoes, onions, dried beans, staples mostly. We get fresh vegetables and fruit when we can, but it is not often." Rebecca nodded, already planning menus in her mind. "I can make do with staples." "What time would you like supper this evening?" Preston pulled a watch from his pocket and consulted it. "It is nearly 5 now. Would 7 be too soon?" "I can manage 7, Rebecca said, though her exhaustion from the long journey was making her bones ache. "Is there anything you particularly like or dislike?" "Anything hot and filling will be welcomed," Preston replied. "The men are not particular." He showed her the rest of the downstairs, including a small office where he kept the ranch records, then led her upstairs. 4 doors opened off the hallway. Preston pushed open the first one on the right. "This is your room." The room was indeed modest, but it was clean and bright, with a window overlooking the front of the property. A bed with a simple quilt, a dresser, A washstand and a small wardrobe comprised the furniture. Her trunk had already been placed at the foot of the bed. "The room at the end of the hall is mine," Preston said, gesturing but not opening that door. "The other two are not currently in use." Catherine had hoped to fill them with children, but it was not to be. The pain in his voice made Rebecca's chest ache with sympathy. "I am very sorry. Life out here is hard," Preston said simply. "People die. You learn to accept it and keep going." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Take some time to settle in. I will be in the barn if you need anything before supper." After he left, Rebecca sank down on the bed, suddenly overwhelmed by everything that had happened in the past few hours. She was here, in Nevada, in a house with 5 men she did not know, expected to cook and clean and maintain a household in a place so foreign it might as well be another planet. The enormity of what she had undertaken crashed over her, and for a moment she wanted to weep. But crying would accomplish nothing. Rebecca had learned that lesson well in the past year. Instead, she stood, unpacked a fresh apron from her trunk, and went downstairs to see what she could prepare for 6 hungry men. The kitchen felt less daunting once she began working. Rebecca found flour, lard, salt, and other basics, along with eggs from chickens she could hear clucking somewhere outside. In the smokehouse, she located bacon and salt pork. The root cellar yielded potatoes, onions, and some withered carrots that could still be salvaged. It was not much, but it was enough. She built up the fire in the stove, set water to boil, and began preparing a simple but filling meal of fried potatoes with bacon, beans that she soaked and cooked quickly, biscuits, and gravy. The familiar rhythm of cooking soothed her nerves, and by the time 7 o'clock approached, she had platters of food ready and the table properly set. The men filed in promptly at 7, their boots making heavy sounds on the wooden floor. They had clearly washed up, their faces scrubbed and hair damp. Preston entered last, and Rebecca noticed how his eyes went immediately to the food, then to her. "It smells wonderful," he said, and the other men murmured agreement. "Please sit," Rebecca said, suddenly nervous again. "Everything is ready." There was a moment of awkward hesitation as the men looked between Rebecca and the head of the table. Then Preston took his place at the foot, and the others settled into their usual seats, leaving the mistress's place conspicuously empty. Rebecca had no choice but to sit there, acutely aware of every eye on her. "Would someone say grace?" she asked, hoping to deflect attention. Jack cleared his throat and offered a simple blessing, and then the food was passed around. The men ate with the silent focus of people who worked hard physically, and Rebecca was gratified to see her offerings disappear rapidly. She ate little herself, too nervous to have much appetite, but the appreciation on the men's faces was reward enough. "This is the best meal we have had in months," Daniel said enthusiastically, reaching for a third biscuit. "Truly, Miss Grace, you have a gift." "It is just simple fare," Rebecca replied, but she felt a flush of pleasure at the compliment. "Simple or not, it beats the charred mystery meat Preston has been serving," Samuel added with a grin. Preston gave him a dark look, but there was no real anger in it. "My cooking kept you from starving." "Barely," Thomas muttered, and the table erupted in laughter. Rebecca found herself relaxing despite her exhaustion. These were good men, she realized, hard-working and decent, with none of the roughness she had feared. They treated her with respect but not stiffness, including her in their easy camaraderie without making her feel like an outsider. After the meal, she began clearing the dishes, but Jack immediately stood to help. "You cooked, miss. Least we can do is help clean up." "That is not necessary," Rebecca protested, but Preston shook his head. "We all pull our weight here," he said firmly. "The men can clear the table and wash dishes. You have done enough for today." Rebecca was too tired to argue. She supervised as the men cleared the table with surprising efficiency, then excused herself to her room. She barely managed to undress and wash before collapsing into bed, asleep almost before her head touched the pillow. The next weeks passed in a blur of exhausting work. Rebecca rose before dawn to prepare breakfast, then spent her days cooking, cleaning, doing laundry, mending clothes, and managing the endless tasks that came with maintaining a household for 6 people. Her hands, once soft and pale, became reddened and calloused from washing and scrubbing. Her back ached from bending over the stove and carrying water. At night, she fell into bed so tired that she sometimes did not remember lying down, but gradually she established a routine. She learned the men's preferences and idiosyncrasies, discovered where things were kept, and began to put her own stamp on the household. She cleaned neglected corners, organized the pantry, and planted a small kitchen garden near the house where she coaxed herbs and vegetables from the reluctant soil. The men noticed and appreciated her efforts, and their praise, simple and genuine, made the hard work bearable. Preston was the most enigmatic member of the household. He worked from dawn until well after dark, managing the ranch with quiet competence. He spoke little at meals, though Rebecca noticed he always thanked her for the food. He was unfailingly polite but maintained a careful distance, never lingering to talk or seeking her company beyond what was necessary. Rebecca understood that he was still grieving his wife, and she respected his need for space, but she also found herself watching him more than was strictly proper. She noticed how gently he handled the horses, how patiently he taught young Daniel to rope, how he made sure the oldest cattle had access to the best grazing. He was a good man, she realized, fair and hardworking and deeply committed to his land and his people. And he was handsome in a way that had nothing to do with refined features and everything to do with strength and capability. One evening in late June, a month after Rebecca's arrival, a summer storm rolled in from the mountains. The temperature dropped dramatically, and wind howled around the house, rattling windows and driving rain against the walls. Rebecca had just finished putting away the supper dishes when Preston appeared in the kitchen doorway. "There is a leak in the parlor ceiling," he said without preamble. "I need to get into the attic to patch it from inside before we have more damage. Can you help?" "Of course," Rebecca replied, following him to the parlor where water was indeed dripping steadily into a bucket he had placed on the floor. Preston led her upstairs and pulled down a ladder that accessed the attic. "I need you to hold the lantern while I work. The light up there is poor." Rebecca climbed the ladder after him, emerging into a low-ceilinged space filled with trunks and boxes and the smell of old wood. Preston moved confidently through the dimness, locating the leak quickly. Rebecca held the lantern high while he worked, watching his capable hands seal the gap with tar and canvas. "You are very good at this," she observed, "at fixing things." "You have to be out here," Preston replied, not looking up from his work. "Cannot wait for someone else to solve your problems. You learn to manage or you fail." "Is that how you see life?" As something to manage, Preston paused, glancing at her with an unreadable expression. "I see life as something that happens whether you are ready or not. You can either handle what comes or be buried by it." "That is a rather bleak philosophy," Rebecca said quietly. "It is a realistic one." Preston returned to his work, his movements efficient. "Out here you cannot afford to be soft. Sentiment is a luxury." Rebecca thought about that, about the hard edge in his voice that had not been there when he spoke of his father or even of his wife. "Was it always this way for you? Or did something make you harder?" Preston's hand stilled. For a long moment he did not speak, and Rebecca thought she had overstepped. Then he said very quietly, Catherine used to ask me that. She said I had locked myself away after my father died, that I had stopped letting myself feel things fully. What did you tell her? That she was wrong. Preston finished his repair and sat back on his heels, finally meeting Rebecca's eyes. But she was not. I did lock myself away. It was easier than dealing with the grief and the fear that I would fail, that I would lose everything my father had built. And then Catherine came along and she made me want to unlock those doors again. For a while I did. And then she died and I remembered why I had locked them in the first place. The raw pain in his voice made Rebecca's throat tight. I am sorry. I should not have pried. You did not pry. You asked an honest question. Preston stood, his head nearly brushing the low ceiling. And I gave you an honest answer. That is more than I have done with anyone since Catherine passed. They climbed back down the ladder in silence, and Preston replaced it in the ceiling. The rain continued to hammer against the house, and thunder rumbled in the distance. Rebecca started toward the kitchen, but Preston's voice stopped her. Rebecca. It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent an unexpected shiver through her. Thank you for your help, and for listening. You are welcome, she replied, then added impulsively, if you ever need to talk, I am a good listener. I know what it is to lose people you love. I know about grief that does not seem to end. Something shifted in Preston's expression, a subtle softening around his eyes. I will remember that. After that night, something changed between them. It was nothing dramatic, just small shifts in the way they interacted. Preston began lingering after meals to talk about the ranch or ask Rebecca's opinion on household matters. He started bringing her small gifts from town. A new wooden spoon when he noticed hers was cracked, a packet of seeds for her garden, a book of poetry that he thought she might enjoy. Rebecca found herself looking forward to these moments, to the sound of his voice and the rare smiles that transformed his serious face. The other men noticed the change and exchanged knowing looks, but they said nothing. Jack, the oldest hand, took Rebecca aside one day while she was hanging laundry and said simply, "The boss is coming back to life. That is your doing, miss. We are grateful." "I have done nothing special," Rebecca protested, but Jack shook his head. "You have done more than you know." This place was dying after Catherine passed. Preston was just going through the motions and the rest of us were following his lead. But you brought life back. You made this feel like a home again. Rebecca did not know what to say to that, so she simply thanked him and returned to her work. But his words stayed with her, warming something deep in her chest that had been cold for a very long time. In mid-July, Preston had to make a trip to a neighboring ranch to look at some breeding stock. He asked Rebecca if she would like to come along, saying the drive would be pleasant and the change of scenery might do her good. Rebecca agreed, surprised and pleased by the invitation. They set out early in the morning, before the worst of the heat, in a small buggy drawn by one of the ranch's gentler horses. Preston handled the reins with easy confidence, and Rebecca found herself relaxing into the rhythmic motion of the vehicle. The landscape, which had seemed so harsh and forbidding when she first arrived, had begun to reveal its own austere beauty. She noticed the subtle colors in the rocks, the delicate wildflowers that bloomed in sheltered spots, the way the light changed throughout the day. "You are smiling," Preston observed, glancing at her. "I am happy," Rebecca replied, surprising herself with the truth of it. "I did not expect to be, but I am. This place has grown on me." "Most people either love it or hate it immediately," Preston said. "There is not much middle ground. Nevada demands that you take a position. What about you? Do you love it?" Preston considered the question seriously. "Yes, it is not an easy love, but it is real. This land has taken much from me, but it has also given me everything that matters. My family's legacy, my livelihood, my purpose. I cannot imagine being anywhere else. Even with all the hardship, especially with the hardship, Preston replied. Anything worth having is worth fighting for. That is what my father taught me. They drove in companionable silence for a while, and then Preston said, "Tell me about Boston. What was your life like there?" Rebecca hesitated, then decided that if Preston could share his pain, she could share hers. Comfortable until it was not. My father was a clerk, not wealthy but respectable. We had a nice house, servants, a place in society. Then my father made some poor investments and took on debt to cover the losses. When he died suddenly, the creditors took everything. My mother and I went from comfort to poverty almost overnight. That must have been terrible, Preston said quietly. The worst part was not the poverty itself, but the way people turned away, Rebecca continued. Friends stopped calling. Invitations ceased. We became invisible. When my mother fell ill, I had to sell nearly everything we had left to pay for her care, and it still was not enough. She died owing the doctor money I could never repay. Preston's hand moved as though to reach for hers, then stopped. I am sorry. That is a heavy burden to carry. It taught me who I really was, Rebecca said. When everything else was stripped away, I learned that I was strong enough to survive. I did not know that before. I thought I was fragile, that I needed protection and comfort, but I was wrong. I am much stronger than I ever imagined. Yes, you are, Preston agreed, and the admiration in his voice made Rebecca's heart skip. You came out here alone, to a place you had never seen, to work for people you did not know. That takes courage. Or desperation, Rebecca said with a self-deprecating laugh. Courage, Preston insisted. I have seen desperate people, and they do not work as hard as you do or care as much about doing things well. You have pride in your work and yourself. That is courage, not desperation. Rebecca felt warmth spreading through her chest at his words. Thank you. That means a great deal, especially coming from you. Why especially from me? Because you do not give empty compliments. When you say something, I know you mean it. Preston smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes and made him look years younger. I will take that as a compliment in return. They arrived at the neighboring ranch in early afternoon and were greeted warmly by the owner, a man named Robert Harrison who had clearly known Preston for many years. He looked at Rebecca with undisguised curiosity, but was too polite to ask questions outright. Preston introduced her simply as his housekeeper, but something in the way he said it made Rebecca wonder if Robert heard more than the words themselves. While Preston inspected the horses, Robert's wife, Margaret, invited Rebecca inside for refreshment. Margaret was a plump, cheerful woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a welcoming manner. It is so nice to meet another woman out here, Margaret said, pouring tea into delicate cups that looked out of place in the rustic kitchen. We are few and far between in this country. How are you finding life on the Parker Ranch? It is an adjustment, but a good one, Rebecca replied carefully. The work is hard but satisfying. Margaret studied her with shrewd eyes. Preston is a good man. He was devastated when Catherine died. They were well suited, I always thought, though their time together was too short. It must have been very difficult for him, Rebecca said, unsure what else to offer. It was. Robert thought Preston might sell the ranch and leave after she passed. The grief was eating him alive. But he stayed and kept working, though I think it was more from stubbornness than anything else. Margaret leaned forward conspiratorially. But I must say he looks better than he has in months, more alive. You must be good for the household. Rebecca felt her cheeks warm. I am just doing my job. Of course you are, dear, Margaret said with a knowing smile that made Rebecca suspect she was not fooling anyone. The drive back to the Parker Ranch was even more pleasant than the journey out. The afternoon sun was gentler, and a breeze had picked up, providing some relief from the heat. Preston seemed relaxed, pleased with the horses he had arranged to purchase, and more talkative than usual. "Margaret likes you," he said at one point. "She told me so while you were admiring her garden. I like her as well. She is very kind." "She also asked if there was anything between us," Preston continued, and Rebecca's breath caught. "I told her you were my housekeeper, nothing more, but she laughed and said I was fooling myself." Rebecca did not know what to say to that. Her heart was pounding, and she kept her eyes fixed on the horizon, afraid to look at Preston. "People will talk no matter what the truth is." "Yes, they will," Preston agreed. "But sometimes they talk because they see things we are too afraid to acknowledge ourselves." Now Rebecca did look at him, startled by the implication in his words. Preston met her gaze briefly before returning his attention to the horses. His jaw was tight, and she could see tension in the set of his shoulders. "Preston," she began, but he shook his head. "Forget I said anything. It was inappropriate." "No, please," Rebecca said urgently. "Do not close yourself off again. If you have something to say, say it." Preston was silent for a long moment, the only sounds the creak of the buggy and the plodding of hooves. Then he said, "I did not expect to feel anything again. After Catherine died, I thought that part of me was dead too. I was content with that, or at least resigned to it. But then you arrived, and slowly, without my even noticing at first, things began to change. I started looking forward to meals, not just for the food but for the conversation. I found myself listening for your voice in the house, your footsteps on the stairs, and I realized that I was feeling things I had no right to feel." Rebecca's hands were shaking. "What kind of things?" "Happiness when I see you smile, pride when the men compliment your cooking, anger when I think about how you were treated in Boston by people who should have helped you, and something else, something I have no business feeling for my housekeeper." Preston's voice had gone rough. "I am not being fair to you by saying this. You came here for employment, for safety and security, not to deal with my confused feelings. I apologize." "Do not apologize," Rebecca said softly, "and do not assume you know how I feel." Preston pulled the buggy to a stop, turning to face her fully. "What are you saying?" Rebecca gathered her courage, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might bruise her ribs. "I am saying that you are not alone in having confused feelings. I am saying that I think about you far more than a housekeeper should think about her employer. I am saying that when you smile at me, I feel like the sun has come out. And I am saying that I do not know what to do about any of it because the situation is complicated and improper. And I am terrified of losing the first place that has felt like home in longer than I can remember." Preston stared at her, his blue eyes wide with shock and something that looked like hope. "Rebecca, I cannot offer you what you deserve. I am a widowed rancher in the middle of nowhere with a hard life and no guarantees. You deserve someone who can give you comfort and security and a place in society." "I do not want society," Rebecca said fiercely. "I had society in Boston, and it abandoned me the moment things became difficult. What I want is a place where I matter, where I can build something real with people who value me for who I am, not what I can do for them. I want to wake up every day knowing that my work has meaning and my presence makes a difference. And I want, God help me, I want you." The words hung between them, raw and honest and terrifying. Preston's face worked through several emotions: shock, disbelief, hope, fear. Then slowly he reached out and took her hand in his. His palm was warm and calloused, his grip gentle despite his strength. "I want you too," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I have been trying not to, trying to convince myself it was wrong or too soon or any number of other excuses. But the truth is simpler than that. I want you, Rebecca Grace. I want your smile at my table and your voice in my house. I want to share my life with you, not as my housekeeper but as my partner, as my wife if you will have me." Rebecca felt tears spilling down her cheeks, though she was smiling so hard her face hurt. "Are you proposing to me?" "I suppose I am, though I am making a terrible job of it," Preston said with a shaky laugh. "I have no ring, no romantic setting, no prepared speech, just the truth of what I feel and the hope that somehow it is enough." "It is more than enough," Rebecca said, squeezing his hand. "And yes, Preston Parker, I will marry you. I will be your wife and your partner and anything else you need me to be." Preston's face transformed, joy breaking through the careful control he maintained. He raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently, reverently. "I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret this decision." "I could never regret it," Rebecca assured him. "This is the first truly right thing I have done in longer than I can remember." They completed the drive home in a state of dazed happiness, hands linked between them, talking in fits and starts about the future they would build together. Preston was concerned about what people would say, worried that Rebecca would face gossip and judgment for marrying so soon after coming to work for him. But Rebecca dismissed his concerns. "People will always talk," she said practically. "Let them. We know the truth of what we feel and why we are making this choice. That is all that matters." When they arrived back at the ranch, the sun was setting in a blaze of orange and purple. Preston helped Rebecca down from the buggy, but this time his hands lingered on her waist and his eyes held promises of the future. They walked into the house together, and Rebecca felt as though she were walking into her real life for the first time. The men were gathered in the parlor when they entered, playing cards and talking in low voices. They looked up at Preston and Rebecca's entrance, and whatever they saw in their faces made them grin knowingly. "I have an announcement," Preston said, his arm moving unconsciously to encircle Rebecca's waist. "Rebecca has agreed to marry me. We will be wed as soon as arrangements can be made." There was a moment of stunned silence, then the room erupted in congratulations and backslapping. Jack shook Preston's hand vigorously while Daniel stammered out awkward but sincere good wishes to Rebecca. Samuel and Thomas clapped Preston on the back, clearly delighted by the news. "About time," Jack said gruffly. "We have been waiting for you to wake up and see what was right in front of you." "You knew?" Preston asked, surprised. "We all knew," Thomas said with a grin. "Watching you two dance around each other has been like watching a couple of green colts trying to figure out which end is front. We are just glad you finally sorted it out." Rebecca laughed, embarrassment and happiness mingling in her chest. "I had no idea we were so transparent." "Only to anyone with eyes," Samuel said cheerfully. "But we are happy for you both, truly." The celebration continued through supper, with the men proposing toasts with coffee since none of them drank alcohol during the work week. Rebecca felt overwhelmed by their genuine affection and support. These men who had been strangers 2 months ago had become her family, and their blessing on her marriage to Preston meant more than any formal approval from society ever could. Later, after the men had retired to the bunkhouse and the house was quiet, Preston and Rebecca sat together on the porch, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. Rebecca leaned against Preston's shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady rise and fall of his breathing. "Are you happy?" Preston asked quietly. "Happier than I have ever been," Rebecca replied honestly. "Are you?" "Yes." Preston kissed the top of her head gently. "I never thought I would feel this way again. I thought that chapter of my life was closed, but you opened it again, Rebecca. You brought light back into this house and into my heart." "We did that for each other," Rebecca said. I was just existing before I came here, going through the motions of survival. You gave me a reason to truly live again." They sat in comfortable silence, hands intertwined, watching the night deepen around them. The future stretched ahead, full of promise and possibility, and for the first time in a very long time, Rebecca was not afraid of what it might bring. The next weeks were a whirlwind of planning and preparation. Preston wanted to marry quickly, partly because he could not bear the idea of waiting and partly because he did not want Rebecca to feel she had to continue as his housekeeper when she was actually his intended. Rebecca agreed, though she insisted on making the occasion special despite the short timeline. Margaret Harrison, when she learned of the engagement, insisted on helping with the preparations. She arrived at the Parker Ranch 3 days after the announcement with fabric for a wedding dress and a determination to see Rebecca properly outfitted. "I knew it," Margaret crowed as she took Rebecca's measurements in the upstairs bedroom. "The moment I saw how Preston looked at you, I knew. Robert owes me $20. He said Preston would not remarry for years, but I told him love does not follow a schedule." "I hope people do not think poorly of Preston," Rebecca said, worried despite her earlier brave words. "Marrying so soon after Catherine's death might seem disrespectful." "Anyone who knew Preston and Catherine would understand," Margaret assured her. "Catherine would not have wanted him to be alone and miserable. She loved him too much for that. And you are not replacing her, Rebecca. You are starting something new with Preston, building a future that is yours together. That is not disrespectful. That is life continuing as it should." The wedding was set for the last Saturday in July, to be held at the small church in Owyhee with a reception at the ranch afterward. Rebecca sent a brief letter to her distant relatives in Boston, informing them of her marriage but not expecting any response. She had no family to give her away, no mother to help her dress, no father to walk her down the aisle. But she had Margaret, who fussed over her like a daughter, and the ranch hands, who treated her with such genuine affection that she never felt alone. Preston rode into town several days before the wedding and returned with a small velvet box. That evening he presented it to Rebecca in the parlor, suddenly awkward and uncertain. "This was my grandmother's ring," he said, opening the box to reveal a delicate gold band set with a small but beautifully cut diamond. "My father gave it to my mother, and she gave it to me before she passed. I offered it to Catherine, but she wanted her own ring, something that was just ours. I respected that. But I am offering it to you now if you want it. If you would rather have something new, I understand." Rebecca took the ring with trembling hands, admiring the craftsmanship and the way the diamond caught the lamplight. "It is beautiful, Preston. I would be honored to wear it." Preston slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as though it had been waiting for her all along. Rebecca looked at it, this tangible symbol of Preston's commitment, and felt tears prick her eyes. "I will treasure it always," she promised. "And I will treasure you," Preston replied, pulling her close for a kiss that was both gentle and passionate, a promise of the life they would build together. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and hot, with a brilliant blue sky that seemed to promise good fortune. Rebecca woke early, too nervous and excited to sleep, and spent the morning bathing and preparing with Margaret's help. The dress Margaret had made was simple but elegant, fashioned from cream-colored silk with lace at the collar and cuffs. It fit Rebecca perfectly, emphasizing her slender waist and making her feel beautiful in a way she had not felt in years. Margaret arranged Rebecca's dark hair in a simple style with a few wildflowers woven through the curls. "You look radiant," she pronounced, stepping back to admire her handiwork. "Preston is going to forget how to breathe when he sees you." Rebecca laughed nervously, her stomach fluttering with anticipation. "I hope I do not trip walking down the aisle. My hands are shaking so badly I can barely hold anything." "That is just excitement," Margaret assured her. "Perfectly natural. Now come, the men are ready to take us into town." The church in Owyhee was small and plain, but someone had decorated it with wildflowers and ribbons, making it feel festive and welcoming. A surprising number of people had gathered for the ceremony: ranchers and their families from the surrounding area, townspeople who knew Preston, and of course the ranch hands in their Sunday best. Preston waited at the altar with the minister, and Rebecca's heart skipped when she saw him. He wore a dark suit that emphasized his broad shoulders and lean frame, his hair neatly combed, his expression one of mingled nervousness and joy. When he caught sight of her walking down the aisle on Jack's arm, his face transformed with such obvious love that Rebecca heard several women sigh. The ceremony itself passed in a blur. Rebecca heard herself making vows, felt Preston slide a second ring onto her finger beside the engagement ring, heard the minister pronounce them husband and wife. When Preston kissed her, gentle and reverent in front of all those witnesses, Rebecca felt as though her heart might burst from happiness. The reception at the ranch was a lively affair, with tables set up outside under the shade of the few trees near the house. Margaret had organized other ranch wives to bring food, and the tables groaned under the weight of fried chicken, roasted beef, potato salad, beans, fresh bread, pies, and cakes. Music was provided by a rancher who played the fiddle and his son with a guitar, and dancing commenced on a wooden platform the men had constructed for the occasion. Preston led Rebecca in the first dance, holding her close as they moved to a slow waltz. "Are you happy, Mrs. Parker?" he murmured in her ear. "Deliriously so, Mr. Parker," Rebecca replied, savoring the sound of her new name. "Though I can hardly believe this is real. This morning I woke as a housekeeper, now I am a wife." "You were never just a housekeeper," Preston said firmly. "From the moment you sat at the head of my table, you were the mistress of this house. The wedding just made it official." Rebecca remembered that first evening, how shocked she had been when Preston insisted she take Catherine's place at the table. Now she understood what he had been offering: not just a seat but a position of honor and respect, a recognition of her worth that had nothing to do with her legal status and everything to do with who she was as a person. "You have given me so much," she said softly. "A home, a family, a future. I will spend my life trying to be worthy of it." "You are already worthy," Preston replied. "You brought life back to a house that was dying. You made me want to live again instead of just existing. That is a gift I can never fully repay." They danced until the sun set and the stars came out, until Rebecca's feet ached and her face hurt from smiling. The guests gradually departed, offering congratulations and best wishes as they left. Finally, only the ranch hands remained, and they tactfully retired to the bunkhouse, leaving the newlyweds alone. Preston led Rebecca into the house, which had been cleaned and decorated in their absence. Flowers filled vases in the parlor and dining room, and someone had lit lamps throughout the house, creating a warm, welcoming glow. Preston's bedroom, which would now be Rebecca's as well, had been prepared with fresh linens and more flowers. Rebecca stood in the doorway, suddenly nervous now that the moment had arrived. Preston came up behind her, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "We do not have to rush anything," he said quietly. "I know this is all very new and perhaps overwhelming. We can take our time." Rebecca turned to face him, placing her hands on his chest and feeling his heart beating strong and steady beneath her palms. "I am not overwhelmed. I am exactly where I want to be with the person I want to be with. I love you, Preston Parker, and I want to be your wife in every way." Preston's eyes darkened with desire and something deeper, something that looked like reverence. "I love you too, Rebecca, more than I have words to express." He kissed her then, deeply and thoroughly, and Rebecca lost herself in the sensation of being held and wanted and cherished. The world outside the bedroom ceased to exist, and there was only Preston, his touch gentle yet passionate, his whispered words of love and devotion, his absolute focus on her pleasure and comfort. Later, much later, Rebecca lay in Preston's arms, her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat slow and steady beneath her ear. She felt complete in a way she had never experienced before, as though all the broken pieces of her life had finally been made whole. No regrets. Preston asked sleepily, his fingers combing gently through her hair. "None at all," Rebecca replied, pressing a kiss to his chest. "This is the happiest day of my life." "Mine too," Preston said, "and it is just the beginning." The weeks following the wedding settled into a new rhythm. Rebecca continued to manage the household, but now she did so as Preston's wife rather than his employee. The distinction seemed subtle but changed everything. The men treated her with even more respect, seeking her opinions on matters beyond the household and including her in discussions about the ranch. Preston consulted her on decisions, valuing her insights and intelligence, and made it clear to everyone that Rebecca was his partner in all things. In late August, Preston had to make a trip to Carson City to conduct business with the Territorial Land Office. He asked Rebecca if she wanted to come along, and she agreed eagerly, never having seen Nevada's capital. They made the journey in a borrowed carriage, taking 3 days to traverse the rough roads. Carson City was much larger than Owyhee, with proper streets, brick buildings, and all the trappings of civilization. Rebecca enjoyed exploring the shops and markets while Preston attended to his business, purchasing supplies and small luxuries that were unavailable in Owyhee. She bought fabric for new curtains, seeds for her garden, books to read during the long winter evenings, and gifts for the ranch hands. On their last evening in Carson City, Preston took Rebecca to dinner at the finest hotel in town. Sitting across from him at a table with white linens and crystal glasses, Rebecca was struck by how far she had come from the desperate woman who had answered an advertisement in a Boston newspaper just 4 months earlier. "What are you thinking?" Preston asked, noticing her expression. "I am thinking about how different my life is now," Rebecca replied. 4 months ago I was alone and frightened, with no prospects and no hope. Now I am married to a wonderful man, living in a beautiful place, with work that gives me purpose and people who care about me. It feels like a dream." "If it is a dream, then we are both dreaming it," Preston said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "And I never want to wake up." The journey back to the ranch was leisurely, and they stopped frequently to rest the horses and enjoy the landscape. Rebecca found herself falling even more deeply in love with Nevada's stark beauty, with its endless skies and dramatic vistas. This was home now, truly and completely, and she could not imagine wanting to be anywhere else. When they arrived back at the ranch, they were greeted enthusiastically by the hands, who had clearly been working hard in their absence. The cattle were sleek and healthy, the outbuildings had received fresh paint, and the garden Rebecca had planted was flourishing under Jack's careful tending. "Everything looks wonderful," Rebecca said, genuinely impressed. "You have all done so well." "We wanted to make sure things were perfect for your return," Daniel said shyly. "Welcome home, Mrs. Parker." The words "welcome home" resonated in Rebecca's chest, filling her with warmth. This was home. These men were family, and the life she was building here was more valuable than anything she had left behind in Boston. September brought the first hints of cooler weather and the beginning of the fall roundup. Preston and the hands worked long days gathering cattle from the summer grazing lands, branding calves, and culling animals to sell. Rebecca kept the household running smoothly, providing hearty meals and maintaining the home place while the men were out on the range. One evening, Preston came in later than usual, exhausted and dusty from a long day's work. Rebecca had kept his dinner warm, and she served him at the kitchen table rather than making him wait for formality in the dining room. "You spoil me," Preston said gratefully, digging into the roasted chicken and vegetables with obvious appetite. "You work hard. You deserve to be well fed," Rebecca replied, pouring him coffee and sitting down across from him. "How is the roundup going?" "Well enough. We should be finished in another week or so. The herd is in good shape and we will have plenty to sell come spring." Preston paused, studying her face in the lamplight. "You look tired, Rebecca. Are you feeling well?" Rebecca hesitated, then decided there was no point in keeping secrets. "I have been feeling a bit off the past few mornings, queasy mostly. I think it might be the heat or perhaps something I ate." Preston's eyes sharpened with concern. "How long has this been going on?" "A week, perhaps a little more. It is nothing serious, just an inconvenience." Preston set down his fork, his expression thoughtful. "Rebecca, is it possible you could be with child?" The question hung between them, and Rebecca felt her heart skip. She had been so focused on the daily demands of running the household that she had not stopped to consider that possibility. But now, thinking back, she realized her monthly courses were late, and the morning queasiness fit with what she knew of pregnancy. "I suppose it is possible," she said slowly, hope and fear mingling in her chest. "I had not really considered it." Preston came around the table and knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "If you are, how would you feel about it?" "Scared," Rebecca admitted, "but also happy. I would love to have your child, Preston, a family of our own. But childbirth is dangerous, especially out here so far from doctors and proper care." "We will make sure you have everything you need," Preston promised fiercely. "Margaret went through 3 births on her ranch and she can help. We will bring in a midwife from Carson City if necessary." "I will not let anything happen to you, Rebecca. I cannot lose you." The raw fear in his voice reminded Rebecca that Preston had already lost one wife. She squeezed his hands reassuringly. "You will not lose me. I am strong, and I will fight with everything I have to come through this safely. For you and for our baby." Over the next weeks, it became clear that Rebecca was indeed pregnant. The morning sickness continued but was manageable, and Rebecca felt well enough to maintain her usual routines. Preston became even more protective, insisting she not lift anything heavy and fussing over her health in ways that were both endearing and occasionally frustrating. The ranch hands were delighted by the news and treated Rebecca with even more care than before. Jack began bringing her special treats from town, things he thought might appeal to her changing appetite. Daniel carved a small cradle from cedar wood, working on it in the evenings with painstaking attention to detail. Thomas and Samuel took over the heavier household chores without being asked, hauling water and chopping wood so Rebecca would not strain herself. Margaret Harrison arrived in early October with supplies and advice, having been summoned by Preston's urgent message. She examined Rebecca with the confidence of someone who had both experienced and assisted with many births. "You are healthy and strong," Margaret pronounced. "The baby is growing well and I see no reason to expect complications. But you need to take care of yourself, Rebecca. Rest when you are tired, eat well, and do not try to do too much." "I will make sure she follows your instructions," Preston said firmly, and Margaret laughed. "I am sure you will, though you might want to avoid smothering her with worry. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time, Preston. Rebecca is not made of glass." The winter months passed slowly, with Rebecca growing larger and increasingly uncomfortable as her pregnancy progressed. Preston became even more attentive, reading to her in the evenings, rubbing her aching back, and holding her close at night when sleep was difficult. He talked to the baby, his deep voice gentle as he shared stories about the ranch and made promises about the future. In late February, when the Nevada winter was at its coldest, Rebecca went into labor. Preston sent Daniel racing into town for the midwife, but the baby was not willing to wait. Margaret, who had been staying at the ranch for the past 2 weeks in anticipation of the birth, took charge with calm efficiency. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Rebecca endured the pain with gritted determination, focusing on Preston's hand in hers and Margaret's steady encouragement. Preston refused to leave the room despite Margaret's suggestion that he might be more comfortable elsewhere, staying by Rebecca's side through every contraction and every moment of struggle. Finally, as the afternoon sun streamed through the bedroom window, their son was born, small and red and squalling with impressive volume. Margaret cleaned him quickly and placed him in Rebecca's arms, and Rebecca felt her heart expand with a love so fierce it was almost painful. "He is perfect," she breathed, tears streaming down her face as she counted tiny fingers and toes. Preston sat beside her on the bed, his own face wet with tears as he looked at his son. "Perfect," he echoed, his voice hoarse with emotion. "You did it, Rebecca. You brought our boy into the world." "We did it," Rebecca corrected, looking up at her husband with exhausted joy. Together, they named the baby Patrick Henry Parker after Preston's father and Rebecca's favorite patriot. Little Patrick was a healthy, hungry baby who demanded frequent feeding and attention, but brought more joy to the household than Rebecca would have thought possible. The ranch hands were completely besotted, taking turns holding the baby and making ridiculous faces to earn his first smiles. Preston was transformed by fatherhood. He would sit for hours holding Patrick, talking to him in a gentle voice, teaching him about the ranch and the land and everything he would inherit someday. Rebecca watched them together and felt her love for Preston deepen even further. This was the family she had dreamed of, but never thought she would have, and she cherished every moment. As winter gave way to spring, and spring to summer, life on the Parker Ranch settled into a new routine that included the demands and delights of raising a young child. Rebecca divided her time between the household and the baby, with the help of a young woman from town named Sarah, whom Preston had hired to assist with the heavier chores. On Patrick's first birthday, they threw a party that brought neighbors from miles around. The ranch house was filled with laughter and conversation, and Rebecca looked around at the gathered friends and family with deep contentment. This was her life now, rich and full and worth every hardship she had endured to find it. That evening, after the guests had departed and Patrick had been put to bed, Rebecca and Preston sat together on the porch as they had done on so many evenings. The summer air was soft and warm, and stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "You ever think about Boston?" Preston asked, his arm around Rebecca's shoulders. "Sometimes," Rebecca admitted, "but only to marvel at how different my life is now. If someone had told me 3 years ago that I would be living on a ranch in Nevada, married to a cowboy and raising a son, I would have thought them mad. But this is where I was meant to be all along, with you." "I think about the day you arrived," Preston said quietly. "I was so lost then, just going through the motions of living without really feeling anything. And then you stepped off that stagecoach, looking terrified and determined all at once, and something shifted. I did not recognize it at first, but looking back, I think I started falling in love with you from that very first moment." "I was terrified," Rebecca confessed. "The town was so small and so far from everything I knew. And then I met you, and you were so serious and formal, and I thought this was going to be the worst decision I had ever made. But then you gave me a place at the head of your table, and I realized you were different from anyone I had ever known. You saw me as a person, not just a servant. That meant everything. You were never just a servant, Preston said firmly. You were the woman who brought light back into my life. The woman who made me want to live again instead of just existing. The woman I was meant to spend my life with. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge and listening to the familiar sounds of the ranch settling for the night. Inside the house, their son slept peacefully, and tomorrow would bring more work and challenges and joy. But for now, in this moment, everything was perfect. 2 years later, Rebecca delivered their second child, a daughter they named Rose Catherine Parker, in honor of Rebecca's mother and Preston's first wife. The birth was easier than Patrick's had been, and Rose was a placid, easy baby who complemented her boisterous older brother perfectly. Preston proved to be just as devoted to his daughter as he was to his son, and Rebecca often found him rocking Rose to sleep while singing old cowboy ballads in his deep, tuneless voice. Patrick adored his baby sister, bringing her wildflowers and interesting rocks and trying to teach her to play before she could even sit up properly. The ranch continued to prosper under Preston's management. He expanded the herd, improved the breeding stock, and began selling horses as well as cattle. The operation grew large enough that they hired additional hands, and Preston built a second bunkhouse to accommodate them. Rebecca managed the growing household with Sarah's help, maintaining the welcoming, comfortable home that had become famous throughout the territory for its excellent food and warm hospitality. When Patrick was 5 and Rose was 3, they welcomed another addition to the family. A son they named Thomas Robert Parker, after 2 of the original ranch hands who had become like family. Thomas was a large baby with his father's blue eyes and his mother's dark hair, and he had a set of lungs that could wake the entire household. 3 children, Rebecca marveled to Margaret during one of her friend's visits. I went from having no family at all to having more than I ever imagined possible. You deserve every bit of happiness you have found, Margaret replied warmly. You and Preston have built something truly special here, not just a successful ranch, but a real home filled with love. As the years passed, Rebecca watched her children grow and her husband age gracefully into middle adulthood. Preston's hair began to show silver at the temples, and laugh lines deepened around his eyes, but he remained strong and vital, still working alongside his men every day. Rebecca herself had changed from the frightened young woman who had arrived in Owyhee 9 years earlier. She was confident now, secure in her place and her worth, her hands work-worn but capable, her heart full. Patrick showed signs of becoming a natural horseman like his father, spending every free moment in the corrals and pastures. Rose had Rebecca's love of learning and could often be found reading or drawing pictures of the ranch and the animals. Thomas was still too young to show definite interests, but he was curious and fearless, constantly exploring and getting into mischief. One evening in late summer, when the children had been put to bed and the house was quiet, Preston found Rebecca in the kitchen finishing the last of the day's chores. He came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Do you remember the first meal you cooked in this kitchen?" he asked. Rebecca laughed softly. "I remember being terrified I would burn everything and you would send me back to Boston on the next stagecoach. I remember thinking the house had not felt so alive since before my father died," Preston countered. "And I remember watching you take your place at the head of the table and thinking that somehow, impossibly, it felt right." "You gave me that place," Rebecca said, turning in his arms to face him. You gave me respect and dignity when I had every reason to expect neither. You saw past what I was supposed to be and recognized who I actually was. That changed everything for me. You changed everything for me, Preston replied, cupping her face in his hands. You took a man who was merely existing and taught him how to live again. You filled this house with love and laughter and life. You gave me a family and a future I had stopped believing in. I love you more now than I did the day we married, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today. Rebecca felt tears gathering in her eyes, moved by the raw honesty in Preston's voice. I love you too. More than words can express. You gave me everything I needed when I had nothing. A home, a purpose, a family, and a love that makes every day worth living. They stood together in the quiet kitchen, holding each other close, surrounded by the life they had built together. Outside, the Nevada night was vast and star-filled, the land stretching endlessly in all directions. But inside, everything was warm and safe and exactly as it should be. The years continued to pass, bringing changes and challenges, but also countless moments of joy. Preston and Rebecca weathered droughts and harsh winters, celebrated good years when the cattle thrived and the ranch prospered, and supported each other through the inevitable difficulties that came with raising children and running a large operation. Patrick grew into a capable young man who shared his father's love of the land and natural ability with animals. On his 18th birthday, Preston gave him a section of the ranch to manage himself, beginning the process of eventually passing the entire operation to his son. Rose developed into a beautiful, intelligent young woman with a gift for music, teaching herself to play a piano that Preston bought her from San Francisco. Thomas showed signs of being more interested in business than ranching, studying the account books and asking astute questions about markets and pricing. Rebecca expanded her role beyond the household, becoming known throughout the territory as someone who could organize community events, mediate disputes, and provide wise counsel. She started a small school on the ranch, teaching not only her own children but also the children of ranch hands and neighboring families. Education was scarce in rural Nevada, and Rebecca was determined that lack of access would not limit the opportunities for local children. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Preston surprised Rebecca with a trip to San Francisco. They left the children in Margaret's capable care and spent 2 weeks exploring the city, attending the theater, dining in fine restaurants, and simply enjoying each other's company without the demands of the ranch and family. On their last evening in the city, they walked along the waterfront, watching the sun set over the Pacific Ocean. Rebecca leaned against Preston's shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady presence that had been her anchor for 2 decades. "Thank you for this," she said softly. "For everything you have given me over these 20 years. Thank you for saying yes when I asked you to marry me," Preston replied. "For taking a chance on a grieving widower in the middle of nowhere, for building this life with me." "I would do it all again in a heartbeat," Rebecca assured him. "Every moment, every challenge, every joy. This is the life I was meant to live, and you are the man I was meant to love." They returned to the ranch renewed and refreshed, ready to face whatever the future might bring. The years continued their steady march, bringing grandchildren and gray hair and the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived. Patrick married a neighboring rancher's daughter and gave them 3 grandchildren who brought new energy and laughter to the ranch. Rose married a teacher from Carson City and moved to town, though she visited frequently with her 2 children. Thomas, true to his interests, moved to San Francisco to pursue business opportunities, but returned home regularly and remained deeply connected to the family. As Preston and Rebecca entered their 60s, They began gradually stepping back from the daily management of the ranch, letting Patrick take on more responsibility while they enjoyed the slower pace of semi-retirement. They spent their days in each other's company, riding out to check on the cattle, working in the garden Rebecca had expanded over the years, and playing with their numerous grandchildren. One spring evening, 43 years after Rebecca had first arrived in Owyhee, she and Preston sat on their porch watching the sunset. Rebecca's hair was completely silver now, and Preston's face was deeply lined, but his blue eyes still lit up when he looked at her, and his hand still found hers automatically. "You remember what I said to you the day we met?" Preston asked suddenly. Rebecca thought back across the decades. "You asked if I was Miss Grace. Then you introduced yourself and helped me onto the wagon." "Before that," Preston said, "in my letters when I hired you, I said I needed someone to manage the household, a housekeeper, nothing more." "I remember," Rebecca replied. "I came here expecting to cook and clean and maintain your house. And instead, you became the heart of this entire operation," Preston said, squeezing her hand. "You became my wife, the mother of my children, the grandmother of my grandchildren, and the love of my life. You came to be a housekeeper, but I gave you a place at the head of my table because even then, on some level, I knew you were meant for so much more." Rebecca felt tears gathering, the good kind that came from profound happiness rather than sorrow. "You saw me, Preston. When I was invisible to everyone else, when I had lost everything and everyone, you looked at me and saw someone worth valuing. You gave me respect and dignity and eventually love. You gave me a life beyond anything I could have imagined." "We gave each other that life," Preston corrected gently. "Every step of the way, we built it together." They sat in silence as the sun disappeared beyond the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. The ranch spread out before them, prosperous and thriving, a testament to decades of hard work and careful stewardship. Inside the house, they could hear their grandchildren's laughter as Patrick's family prepared for supper. The sounds were warm and familiar, the soundtrack of a life well lived. "No regrets?" Preston asked, the same question he had posed on their wedding night so many years ago. "Not a single one," Rebecca replied, the same answer she had given then and would give until her last breath. "This is exactly where I was meant to be. With you, always with you." Preston raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently, the gesture as loving and reverent as it had been when they were newlyweds. "And I with you, my love. Today, tomorrow, and for all the days we have left." As darkness fell and stars began to emerge in the vast Nevada sky, Preston and Rebecca remained on the porch, hands clasped, hearts intertwined, surrounded by the life and love they had built together. She had come to Owyhee to be a housekeeper, expecting nothing more than employment and survival. But Preston Parker had given her a place at the head of his table, recognizing her worth before she even fully understood it herself. And from that simple gesture of respect and recognition, they had built a love story that would be remembered by their children and grandchildren for generations to come, a testament to the transformative power of seeing and valuing another person completely. The evening breeze carried the scent of sagebrush and distant rain, familiar and comforting. Rebecca leaned against Preston's shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, and knew with absolute certainty that every hardship she had endured, every loss she had suffered, had been worth it to arrive at this moment, in this place, with this man. She had found her home, her purpose, and her great love in the wild Nevada territory, and she would not trade a single day of it for all the comfort and security Boston society could have offered. This was her life, rich and full and perfectly imperfect, and she was grateful for every beautiful moment of it.